Do not God video presentation. So another economics video, probably the last one, and I'll just give you the story. The last video has the story in it, but the beginning of the video got cut off, which was sort of the simple way of understanding the entire banking system. And the key analogy is that it's just a pawn shop, essentially, and that pawn shop is a sort of a sensible, it's a rational concept, this idea of having a place where you can, if you need some of this cash stuff, and let's understand the cash stuff is just a way of saying we have a certain thing that's really easy to carry, and we've only made a certain amount of it, and we guarantee it by the government, by the king, that it's worth a sack of gold or a bag of wheat or whatever it is. And so it's a guaranteed piece of paper signed by the king kind of thing, and it just facilitates function. So it's sort of like a pawn slip, like you get a slip from the pawnbroker, and you're just saying that the pawnbroker instead gives out these slips, these little guarantee slips, and so you put stuff in and you get a slip out, and the slip has to come from somewhere, obviously, which is the only complication to this description. But anyway, just so you just think of it as a pawn shop banking system. You put something of value in, you get something of value out. And the game is that you need the piece of paper, the universal paper, that you can buy anything with. And that's why you put the stuff in the pawn shop, is because you can't say, well, here's my house, I have a piece of paper, the deed, I'll cut the deed in quarters and then go out and try to sell a quarter of my house. It's just too complicated, too messy. So you need some kind of system like this where you can put value in to get liquid value out. So that's the difference. You have, so value can be in a form that is frigid or solid or frozen. Let's call it frozen, like a house or clothes or diamond ring. And the other stuff is liquid, where you can go anywhere and anybody will take this universal value. And it's easy to carry and all that kind of crap. And it's easy to transfer now, right? Because now you can have this stuff, this value, in the form of a digital form, where it's in a vault somewhere. Okay, your stuff goes in, you get the cash slip out, and you just essentially putting the cash in just another, you could just think of it as another device where you just put cash in. So another function of the bank is a place where you put the cash in, you know, the universal paper, and you have a digital account now, like a PayPal account. It's in there, and now you can just transfer stuff between banks without even having to write a check or do any of that kind of stuff. But it's still this that you own, is the valuable paper, the universal paper that buys anything at specific hard prices, and you can't make more of this stuff. There's only a certain amount of it, and if you made more of it, it would be less valuable, quite obviously. So you have to control how much of it exists. All right, so what the banks are doing. So the idea of a bank is that some rich guy shows up and he has he can buy a bunch of that paper. So he sells a bunch of his stuff and he gets a bunch of this universal paper, and now he can take in people's stuff and give them a piece of paper. And he gets interest, and so he makes money on the deal. You know, they come back to get their stuff and they have to pay him a little extra paper when they do it. So he's just taking stuff in, giving paper out, is the principle. Now the banks now don't even have this money, so, you know, it's sort of irrelevant to the story, but the idea is you're supposed to have the paper, a certain limited amount of it, but they can make the paper, essentially. Well, they can't really, so I shouldn't have said that. But they can certainly use up all the paper they have. So anyway, so this isn't going quite as efficiently as I wanted it to, but so the idea is okay, let's just go back again. We have pawn shop, and we have this idea that you have hard assets in the world. So especially the rich, and this is what the whole story is about the rich people. They can take their hard assets and they can mortgage them, essentially. They can put them in the bank and get cash out. So they get cash for their hard assets. Okay, they mortgage them. And the game is as I've pointed out, theoretically, they could go out with this cash, if they're getting its true value, and they're not paying much interest, low percent, 1% on the mortgage or some low amount, they can buy anything. They could buy another mansion and do the same thing, or they can just buy stock, okay, on the stock market, and they can put that stock in and get more cash out, and then make another transaction. They can just keep doing that. Now, obviously, the amount of cash the bank has, it doesn't have an unlimited amount, so it can't keep making cash, can't get it from nowhere. So there's a limit to how many times this can be done. But the truth is, it's been done to its limit. That is, what people have done is they've put one thing in, gotten the cash out, put another thing in, gotten the same cash out, put another thing in, get a cash out. And what they've put in is a bunch of stocks or pieces of paper and bonds, so especially bonds. So the idea is the government prints a bond, and the real theory is that somebody has to pay the government real cash. Okay, the government's taking in cash from somebody. Okay, and of course it's turned into digital cash, but I mean it's still cash he takes in when they sell the bond. And the person who bought the bond, though, just puts it in the bank and gets his cash back. So he has cash still. He didn't lose any cash when he bought the bond, because the bond is accepted by the bank as collateral, and they'll give you cash for it. So bonds don't mean anything in the current economy, in the sense that they're the same thing as cash, but you just put it in the bank and you get cash back out for it. So you don't pay anything for it, and it's already paying. The bond pays interest, so even if you just sold it to the bank, it wouldn't make any difference, because they just collect that interest, so you're not even going to pay extra interest. So essentially it doesn't hurt a rich man to buy a bond, because he just collateralizes it with everything else he has mortgaged. He just mortgages the bond. It's no big deal. The bank won't charge him any more than the interest on the bond, no doubt. And so it's a non-event in terms of the cash still is in the economy. It doesn't get lost somewhere. It doesn't disappear somewhere. So anyway, so the limit on all of this nonsense is understanding what's the reserve accounts of the banks, and understanding they only have so much cash to give out, right? So once they run out of cash, they're not supposed to just make cash. They're not supposed to print it. They can't print it because the Federal Reserve controls that. So you have the Fed here, and again, it just has accounts for all the banks. All the banks have a register, and it's basically their vault cash. That is, how much cash they have to give out is essentially represented by what's in these accounts. So this is essentially, they just move their vault. They don't keep the cash in their vault anymore. They just keep it in this Federal Reserve vault. And so the vault represents how much cash they have to be able to distribute, theoretically, to make deals. How many deals they can make is going to be decided by how much cash they can produce to make the deals. All right, so what the government has done is that it's basically told the banks, as I pointed out, to buy bonds off the market. All right, so real cash is going out to the guy who had the bond. So the guy who had the bond sells it to the bank. He gets cash out. So he has, now there's more cash in the economy. So it's been released from the vault and is now in a purchaser's hand. And now the purchaser can buy stuff with that money. All right. So that's the advantage of doing it, is you put more money in the economy. And where's that cash going to go? It's going to go into the stock market, make it go up, because he's going to buy stocks and other commodity items that are going to cause the markets to increase in value, because now there's more cash available to buy that crap. And what happens to the bond? Well, the bond just sits here in the bank. All right. Because the bank paid for it and bought it, but it didn't have the money. Okay, so, and what the Federal Reserve did was just put a line in here saying, okay, here's the money for that bond. You paid for it, and so we'll just increase your account, and we'll just give you $1 trillion more. So you spend $1 trillion buying bonds, we'll just put $1 trillion in this account. All right. But the government made the deal that you can't spend it, though. Okay, you can't redistribute this cash. It has to stay in this vault. It can't be put into your vault and then distributed, because it's not really, we didn't really pay for it. Okay, it's not real money. we're just saying it's theoretically your money, but it's not really your money. You can't really have it, because what we want to do is eventually we want to buy the bond back off the market and take this money away from you. So we want to buy that bond. The federal government wants to eventually pay back the money for the bond and release it back on the market. That's what the federal government wants to do someday, but it's not going to be able to do it because it'll never have $1 trillion worth of cash to buy the bond. So it'll never be able to do it, but it wants to. It's saying it wants to. It's pretending it wants to. Well, anyway, so these accounts are now, so these accounts for, till 2010, the line for the Federal Reserve was this. There was a small amount of money in here, a mere billions, like could have been just $20 billion, was in the total assets of the banks. So the total assets of the banks that were in the Federal Reserve vault was $20 billion. And then in 2008, this thing happened, and now it's $5 trillion. Well, it's 4 point something trillion, but now it's slated to go up. It's already been stated it's going to happen. So it's going to go up to some $6 trillion. $6 trillion. Huge amount of money, right? Gigantic increase in these funds. And so we know the money is not going out instantly because the government made that deal and none of it left. So for 10 years it stayed at $4 trillion. So for 10 years the line went from, went up and then just stayed flat, and now it's going to go up again. So we know the banks did take the money. They weren't allowed to take the money. That's the deal being made. So it's just a way of hiding our bonds, essentially. Hiding the obligation to pay them and hiding their negative effect on the markets. See, the stock market can't go up if people own this stuff and they can't monetize it. Then there's no cash in the economy. So they need these bonds to come off the market so they can release that cash so people can buy more stock and we can inflate the stock market. So the real point is, and so there's all kinds of other ways they're doing this. I pointed out the FDIC insurance fund has been abused to protect a bunch of junk bonds, a bunch of bad debt that went bad. So a bunch of the stuff the pawn shops took in was in the form of rich people's stocks. Their junk went into the pawn shop and it lost value while it was in the pawn shop. And now the banks are bust because they have a bunch of collateral that doesn't cover the loan. So they gave out $1 trillion, and the assets they took in are now only worth, 0.5 trillion or 500 billion. So they lost $500 billion. And that's when the government had to come in and come to the rescue, because it had to make all of this bad stock good stock. So a lot of it was junk, a lot of it was mortgages, and a lot of it was other stuff that'll never be paid back. So a lot of it was bad debt. And they just guaranteed, with the FDIC insurance fund, they guaranteed the bad junk. Just said, we'll protect you. So if you buy the bad junk for the real price, so it had a $50 price, but its real price when it was bought was $100. So the government just came in and said, we'll guarantee the $100 price. So even though it's only worth $50, we'll guarantee $100. And so now that insurance fund has $7 trillion. It's covering $7 trillion worth of assets. And it only has $100 billion in the fund. And so it's a 1.4% liquid. That is, it can only cover 1.4 cents on all the dollars it's covered. So that was another place they hid another $5 trillion in fake money, phony, hidden obligations to the federal government. Not real bonds, but fake IOUs. So it's an IOU essentially placed in the FDIC insurance fund. So the insurance fund has 1.4% of real assets to cover $7 trillion. And the rest of it is just IOUs. Okay, so they took also, so the other example I've brought up is the Social Security fund, where the payroll taxers had to pay in advance extra money to create $2 trillion of surplus. And that $2 trillion of surplus then was essentially used to give the rich tax cuts. So we cut taxes, the liability on the rich, that is money they couldn't invest in the stock market, right? If they have to pay taxes, they can't use the money to make the stock market go up, right? So, you know, if you want the stock market to go up, you lower taxes on the rich because the rich will buy stocks with the money and put them, you know, in the bank, blah, 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 you know, do the whole racket all over again. But anyway, so there's a clear correlation between the rich having money, you know, having access to their money and being able to invest it, because that's what they're going to do with it. They're going to make the stock market go up. And so they took the money out of that was paid in advance by payroll taxers and gave the fund an IOUs. So it's another $2 trillion of liabilities that now the federal government has because we gave the money to the rich. Just, you know, said, you have the $2 trillion, you invest it in the stock market. So the point is these are all inflationary behaviors, but they don't make inflation because they've found a mechanism, a method, where all of the debt, so any of these new debt instruments, right, the trillions of dollars in the Federal Reserve, the trillions of dollars in the FDIC insurance fund, and then the pension funds and the Social Security funds and all the other funds that they put IOUs in, all of that money went to making the rich richer, cutting their taxes, and so all of that money went into the stock market and made the stock prices go up. So making the rich richer, because the rich are the people that own the stock market. On top of that, they took actual pension fund, whatever was real money in the pension funds, and actually invested it in the stock market, which boosted the stock market, of course. But now it makes the pension fund even more vulnerable to a decline in the economy. So any decline in the economy kills the pension funds, kills essentially the Social Security Trust Fund. It kills all of this stuff because there's no place to get the assets from. So it's all just inflation in one thing, the stock market, the commodity markets. So it doesn't have anything to do with inflation, cash inflation. It just has to do with the inflation of one thing, stock prices. So the rich now can claim they're insanely rich because they have all these claims for cash. So all the bonds, all the reserve money, those are all IOUs, and they're all IOUs that are in one way or another tied to the rich and what they own. That's all the collateral. All those IOUs are the collateral in the banks, in the pawn shop. And they have made the rich incredibly cash liquid and rich. And now they have huge claims. So $40 trillion worth of claims against the government saying, I own stuff. I own stuff, and I have a claim on cash, and you're the one who has to pay it. You're the one who has to provide me the cash. If I decide to sell what I have in the market, the government is the one who has to provide the cash. They're the ones who own all this collateral, the IOUs, and so they're the ones that'll have to produce the cash on demand. And obviously they can't produce $40 trillion worth of cash when they only have an income of $2 trillion, and they're obviously already spending their income. You know, the tax dollars are already going somewhere. They don't have an extra $2 trillion they're getting in that they can just all of a sudden decide to cash, you know, that we can collect more taxes. So the only alternative is either make huge increases in taxes to get the cash to pay this, or you have to print the cash, because the government can do that. It can release the money in the Federal Reserve accounts and just say, let all that cash out. But it's an obvious problem because there's, like I said, there'll be $6 trillion worth of cash is in the Federal Reserve. There's only $2 trillion in circulation now. So obviously that would be, you're putting in, it's more than 300% more cash into the economy. And all that cash, as soon as you put it in, as soon as you make more cash, well, cash is the standard. A dollar bill buys a certain amount of gold. Well, if there's 3 times more cash in the economy, then you're going to need 3 of these dollar bills to buy the same gold. So your cash is going to devalue. So anybody holding cash is going to watch their cash turn into shit. So as soon as they release this money, it's hyperinflation. If they do the tax thing, well, that gets them into trouble, because then the market keeps going down because the rich don't have the money to keep it up. They have to sell stuff to pay the taxes. And now all the collateral gets even worse, and there's even more claims on the government for the money. So the system is just dead. It just can't function. So the real takeaway is the quality of the collateral. And as soon as the pawn shops took IOUs, like somebody owned it, somebody comes in and they gave the pawnbroker, they gave the pawnbroker a thing that wasn't a real thing. They gave the pawnbroker an IOU. Somebody walked in and said, "Look, I have a piece of paper that says Joe Smo, gave me his house or gave me some piece of value, and so I have an IOU for his thing." Okay. As soon as they start taking these pieces of paper and giving cash out on that, because the IOU is only as good as the economy is. It's only as good as that stock price is. See, an IOU to a stock is kind of pointless, because if the stock goes down, you don't have any collateral. It's not a durable piece of collateral. It's a very vulnerable piece of collateral. And so that's what the whole banking system is, though. The banking system entirely runs on putting debt into the vault and let cash leave the vault. And that's what the whole thing runs on, and that has inflated the price of the markets, and it's a kind of inflation that has to arise. There's no way to stop that inflation from eventually having to be paid. You can't just do it forever. It's credit card debt. The government is way overextended on its credit card, and someday it's going to have to pay it back, and it doesn't have the cash, and it doesn't have the income. So either it has to increase its income, or it has to print the cash, and either one of those are inflationary. Either one of those are going to devalue the dollar that people have in their pocket, or what they think they own. Everything has to get profoundly devalued. So really the problem is that this debt has just created a huge increase in the paper value. So you could say it's the paper value of the market. So all these companies, all this stuff, they have a paper value that's way in excess of any real value, and eventually, when the shit hits the fan, that paper value isn't going to mean anything, but the only thing that's going to mean something is real assets, not paper assets. Not what paper says, but what paper can actually do, how much there is, and all that stuff. So all of this is, like I said, the rich can claim they own a whole lot of stuff on paper, but they don't really own that value, because if this stock price goes down, all of that paper goes down. All of that fake value goes down, and how far it goes down, where's the reality? The reality is, way down here. The reality, what that stuff is really worth, is way down here. So it can lose a lot more than half and three-quarters. It can lose hundreds of times its value in reality. What else I want to say? So it's just hidden debt, and debt is a real liability, and the real liabilities are going to come to roost really soon, because, see, you can sort of understand, like, if the banks have a bunch of bad assets, they're going to have to keep getting bailed out. Every time the stock market goes down, they're going to need a bailout, because they have a bunch of these assets that are completely dependent on the stock prices being high. So the stock prices go down, their collateral goes down, the value of the stuff in their store goes down, and they're not going to be able to sell that stuff on the market to get back the money they gave away. They're only going to get 10 cents on their dollar. So it's a huge amount of money they're going to lose. And they're going to say to the government, bail us out, or else, basically. Because if they don't bail them out, then they're going to take the money out of the Federal Reserve, and that's essentially printed cash that hasn't gone liquid yet. It hasn't gone into the economy yet. So it's all printed, and it's sitting there in the vault waiting to be distributed. And as soon as they let that out, that's going to be real cash. So from $2 trillion, we're going to go to $4 trillion in circulation, and so that's 50% inflation right there. I mean, it's going to cause hyperinflation if they don't bail them out. And when people see this bailout happening over and over again, they're finally going to figure out that all we're doing is bailing out. We're giving them free Las Vegas. We're letting them keep all their profits, and we're taking all the losses. And that's, you know, most people know that's stupid. Okay. They're supposed to be earning this money. They're not supposed to have a free ride and a free lunch. And that's what they've been riding on, is a free government-protected lunch, where they just make huge profits, huge increases in their wealth, their claims to cash, and they don't have to pay for any of the liabilities, because as soon as they have even the look of bankruptcy, they threaten to take to liberate cash that can't be liberated without destroying the value of our money. Well, anyway, I was hoping that'd be a little more fluid. Anyway, but the pawn shop is the real analogy, and the idea of what leverage is just taking assets and putting them back in the bank, mortgaging them, saying, give me cash, you keep the deed, and give me the cash, and then I buy something, you keep the deed, give me the cash, I buy something, you keep the deed, give me the cash. How that mechanism was the one they didn't stop. And that's the mechanism that has made all of these assets corrupt. And the idea, too, that there's been no distinction between a debt and cash. So the banks treat the bonds like they were good as gold, when they have no hope of being as good as gold. And so no one's taking responsibility for the fact that none of these bonds can be cashed, because the government can't afford to cash them. It can't produce the income to pay them. So every time a bond comes due, the government has to issue a new bond to pay for it. And that perpetual debt stream has no hope of being perpetual. It's real debt, it's real credit card liability, and the liabilities eventually will be felt, because all of the assets in the pawn shop sooner or later are just going to be IOUs. There's not going to be any real value anywhere. And it's going to be realized because somebody's going to want cash, and they're going to realize, I can't get it. All right. Something like that will be the trigger. All right, so let's just play this a little bit.
Their bad habits, but now we can see everyone has developed these bad habits.
So he's putting it in bad habit quotes because he doesn't think it's a bad habit. He doesn't think debt is a bad habit, and he doesn't think government being in insane amounts of debt and creating that debt just to inflate markets isn't a bad habit. It's a silly idea. It can't work. You can't pay it back unless you destroy the value of the cash. The only way to pay back $40 trillion is to make a dollar worth nothing, 1/1,000,000th of a penny. If you make it worth 1/1,000,000 of a penny, well, then it's really easy to pay the debt back. Okay, but that's the only way you can pay it back, is huge inflation. It's happened to countries before. We've seen the ruin. Just look at the Japanese yen, okay, whatever, $368,000 equals $1 US. Okay, I mean, obviously something dramatically bad happened to that yen.
And I think we'll get to see that it's perfectly all right to do this.
Right, so it's perfectly all right to buy on a credit card and just put the credit card in a vault and never pay it back and just pretend it's an asset. That's perfectly okay. There's just nothing could possibly be wrong with that idea, and you can just do it forever. Just keep spending and putting it in a vault somewhere and pretend nobody has to pay for it. Obviously, the limiting factor, again, is the amount of cash in circulation. Again, the banks don't have any cash reserves. The Federal Reserve accounts are full of fake cash they can't access. They don't have any cash. They've put all their cash out, and they've taken in a bunch of crappy collateral. And that's the simple equation. And it won't work.
and this is the kind of opening video. In the past, I've stuck to economics.
So he's just going to now talk politics. Well, anyway, so he just said the phrase that all you need to hear is that it's all right, that this system can work, that there's some theory to this nonsense that makes sense. That anytime the stock market goes down, just create more national debt to boost it up. That's all. Just put more cash in rich people's hands, the ones who got hurt by the going down part. Just give them back their money, and they'll put it back in the market, and it'll go back up again. What's the problem? So what? You've made all the American people liable for the money. No big deal. They'll pay it somehow in some magic day. Some magic day, the debt will quit going up like this, and somehow we'll just pay it all off, and it'll be no problem at all. We'll just tax people a little more and just collect all the money, and no problem at all. No, big problem. Gigantic problem.
Fiscal and monetary.
Well, anyway, so he's just saying he's going to go on to the politics of it. Yeah, how you convince the people. What ends up getting voted on. And the truth is that frankly, there's just so many people have no clue how this thing really works. They think there's a Fed conspiracy. They think the Fed has printed money. They think all kinds of wacky shit that has not fucking happened. So they don't have any rational understanding. So there is a vague population, a population of people who do know. They can see it. The rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer, and they see it and they get it. It's a game. It's a racket. They know they're getting shenanigan. They know they're getting fucked. So they know that much, but they don't know how they're getting fucked. They're getting fucked by this leverage bullshit. Like I said, if you could do it, you would be doing it right now, right? I mean, if I could go to some place and just tell them what I have in my house as assets, and I could get cash for it, a mortgage on it, and it was very low interest. So I had to pay a tiny amount of a premium to get everything I own turned into cash. A big pile of cash. And then I could take the cash and invest it in a market where I could get 5% increase in my money. I'd be doing it, right? So, obviously. And then I'd figure out that, hey, you know what? The extra money, I could take those assets I bought and I could also mortgage those. I could just keep doing that, and I'll make 5%, then I'll make 10%, then I'll make 15%, then I'll make 20%. So the more times I do it, the more I make another big pile of profit. So I can make 25% on my money by just buying stuff, mortgaging it, and buying some more stuff, mortgage it. So, I mean, it's clearly a racket that breaks the theme, the idea of the system. It's a poison to the function of this idea of the pawn shop. It just breaks the function. Like I said, if the pawn shop was giving you such a good deal, like you took something in and got almost exactly as much as it was worth, instead of half as much as it was worth, you'd understand that you'd have a hell of an incentive to just keep pawning stuff, right? I mean, just, go to the pawn shop, pawn this, get the cash, go to Bloomingburg's next door, buy some shirts and shit, just go to the pawn shop and pawn it, get some more cash, go out and buy some more crap, pawn it. But you kind of get it. You get to own all that stuff still, technically. Okay, it's part of your asset value. And so any appreciation, like I said, you go to the store and buy stuff that you think is going to be more expensive next year. So you just fill the pawn shop full of stuff you think will be more expensive next year, and you're going to win big when you go back to the pawn shop and take the stuff out. But you're going to lose big, right? The other side of the story is if you made a bunch of bad purchases and the stuff's only worth half as much as it was last year, then you're going to be in big trouble. Because now you're liable to buy back your stuff and it's only worth half as much. All right. Well, to remonetize your stuff. Take it out and sell it. You can't sell it for what your obligation is. You have to pay the pawnbroker more to get it out than it's worth. So when you get it out, you get the money, but it's only worth. You have to give him $100, and then you go out and sell it on the street, and you only get $50 back. Well, obviously you've lost $50. That kind of thing. So anyway, enough probably of a video. I wish it was a little better, but it's really just the simple system of this idea of collateral and collateralizing, which is essentially just turning hard assets into liquid assets, cash. Okay.